Have you ever witnessed a moment so shocking that it seemed to suspend reality itself? Picture a sprawling mansion behind iron-wrought gates, the grandeur rivaling palaces in Monaco, and then a lone, heavily pregnant woman trembling on the sidewalk, begging for spare change. Suddenly, a sleek black limousine glides to a stop, the back window rolling down to reveal a confident billionaire chuckling dismissively at her desperation. Little does he know, she is the one person he's sworn to protect. In the next breath, security guards, suspicious and concerned, discover the unimaginable truth. This destitute stranger is his long-lost wife. James Harrington was known far and wide as the billionaire nobody could touch. Born into a family of entrepreneurial giants who had links to Morgan Stanley and had once partnered with philanthropic efforts organized by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, he seemed destined for unimaginable success from the start. He expanded his family's wealth through risky yet brilliant investments, soared through the ranks of high finance, and eventually built his own multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, Harrington Capital. Everyone who encountered him perceived him as a living icon, a man of power, wealth, and unflinching composure. James lived in a palatial estate on the outskirts of Boston, reminiscent of the regal mansions dotting Newport. The property sprawled across a dozen acres of manicured lawns, with towering oak trees that had stood for centuries. Classical statues dotted the fountains, and the sweeping driveway leading to his front gates was lined with cherry blossoms. At any hour of the day, you could find staff attending meticulously to every detail. Drivers polishing luxury cars, gardeners trimming hedges, maids ensuring the marble floors gleamed like mirrors. To outsiders, James's life appeared perfect. He commanded boardrooms, rubbed shoulders with global elites, and traveled the world in his Gulfstream G650. Yet behind this glittering facade, whispers circulated about a hidden side to James' rumors of heartbreak, of a personal life guarded so fiercely that few dared question him about it. No one suspected that in the shadows of this emperor lay an even bigger secret. A love story interrupted, and a broken vow that would soon come knocking on his door in the most heart-wrenching way possible. On a chilly autumn morning, the sun struggled to pierce through stubborn clouds. The Harrington estate seemed even more imposing under a grey sky. That day, the staff bustled anxiously. James Harrington was set to finalize a massive deal with European tech moguls who were due to arrive any moment. Security was tighter than usual, and uniformed guards scrutinized every face approaching the gates. Sitting on the sidewalk just beyond the ornate iron gates was a figure that nobody recognized at first. She was a young woman, her once elegant clothing now worn and mismatched. Her hair hung in limp, tangled strands around her face, and she held her arms protectively around a pronounced baby bump, as though shielding a precious treasure. Passers-by spared her pitiful glances, but few stopped to help. She'd been there for hours, trembling eyes darting nervously from staff to staff, hoping someone might pay attention. Her desperation finally caught the eye of a security guard named Marcus Taylor, an ex-cop who prided himself on reading people. Something about her posture struck him as oddly familiar. She was not the typical person he'd encountered in his days as a policeman, nor was she one of the usual onlookers who hovered around the Harrington estate out of curiosity. Silently, he moved closer, trying to catch a glimpse of her face. The moment he saw her weary eyes and trembling lips, something stirred in his memory, though he couldn't quite place where he'd seen her before. Morning advanced, bringing with it a bevy of sleek town cars delivering executives. Then came the star of the show, James Harrington's personal limousine, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, gliding through the estate's long driveway, like a king approaching his castle. The gates opened automatically, but the pregnant woman scrambled to her feet, reaching out in panic. She tried to wave down the passing limousine, her pleading voice muffled by the thick glass. Inside the Rolls-Royce, James was on the phone with a colleague finalizing contract details. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed movement. He glanced past the tinted window and saw the disheveled woman practically throwing herself at the car. Shaking his head in disapproval, he gave a cold laugh, remarking to his colleague, "Some people will do anything for money." Then he ordered his driver to press on. The shock and betrayal in the woman's face mirrored a heartbreak that went unnoticed by almost everyone except Marcus. When the gates closed behind James's car, the pregnant woman collapsed onto the sidewalk, sobbing in silent misery. Shock reverberated through the security team, who had never witnessed such desperation at the Harrington property. The staff was used to James ignoring the masses, but for some reason this encounter felt different, as though a deeper tragedy was unfolding right before their eyes. Inside the estate, James Harrington breezed through the marble foyer, greeted the butler, and swiftly moved to his private study. A sanctum lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, packed with rare first editions. Lately, James had been restless. Even his most loyal assistant Clara noticed he'd been growing more guarded, refusing to engage in friendly small talk. Perhaps it was the looming acquisition, or perhaps it was something deeper, a secret that gnawed at him whenever he was alone. In hushed voices, household staff whispered rumors. Some claimed James had a whirlwind marriage, long ago stories that had never been verified, but continued to fascinate new hires. Supposedly, he'd met a woman named Eliana at the University of Pennsylvania. They'd fallen madly in love, married in secret, then parted ways under mysterious circumstances. Why, nobody knew. The story was murky, involving a heated argument, misunderstandings about money, or even betrayal. Over time, James's staff had learned to never mention the subject to him directly. That very day, as the staff bustled about preparing for an evening reception with the European investors, Marcus Taylor discreetly approached the head of security, Carter Smith. Marcus described the pregnant woman standing at the gate. Carter's brows furrowed at the details. He too had vague recollections of a photo hidden away in James's office, one that could match the description of this stranger. Suspicion was brewing, and neither man could ignore the ominous cloud of coincidence forming overhead. Outside, the woman remained near the estate gates, too exhausted to move. Her trembling hands held a small locket around her neck. Whenever she felt her panic rising, she squeezed it tight as though it were her lifeline. Hours passed before a concerned housemaid named Rosa discreetly approached from the gate's interior side, bringing a warm blanket and a bottle of water. In hushed, Spanish-accented English, Rosa asked if the woman needed anything else. Through tear-filled eyes, the woman managed to mutter, "Eliana. My name is Eliana." Rosa gasped softly. That name had been whispered in the Harrington estate for years. The same name James's staff used only in secret corners, always followed by a hush, as though the very air around them might carry the sound back to James. Gently wrapping Eliana in the blanket, Rosa coaxed her to drink. "We've heard that name before," she confessed quietly. "Are you somehow connected to Mr. Harrington?" The question hung in the crisp autumn air. Eliana's eyes glistened with more tears as she gave a small nod. "He's my husband." The words emerged weakly, as though each syllable was loaded with sorrow and regret. Rosa's hands flew to her mouth. If this was true, if James Harrington's estranged wife had returned and was pregnant, Everything was about to change. The staff had only one recourse: they had to alert Carter and Marcus. And soon, the entire household would be humming with the scandalous news that the heavily pregnant beggar outside the gates wasn't just anyone, she was James's wife. Inside his sprawling study, James Harrington was locked in heated negotiations via conference call with the European Tech Consortium. His focus was unwavering numbers. Figures projected growth synergy. But beneath the calm facade, a growing unease tugged at him. Something about that woman at the gate had jolted a memory. Sorrowful eyes, he could not quite place a warmth and vulnerability that pricked at his well-guarded heart. Suddenly a frantic knock echoed on the carved mahogany door. Marcus and Carter entered. Their usually calm demeanors were replaced by urgent expressions. James lifted an eyebrow, annoyed. "This had better be important," he said, muting the call. Sir Carter began, voice quivering just enough to betray his tension. "The young woman at the gate, the one you saw, she's been identified." Marcus cleared his throat, before adding, "She says her name is Eliana. She's claiming to be your wife." For a moment, James froze, color draining from his face. Then almost as quickly, he dismissed them with a wave. "Impossible. I have no wife." He turned back to his laptop, attempting to resume the conference call, but found himself unable to unmute the line. His mind churned in confusion. In all his years of compartmentalizing, he never once contemplated what might happen if the past returned in such a direct, undeniable form. It took another desperate interruption from Carter for James to realize that if this woman was indeed who she claimed to be, ignoring her was not an option. James ended the call abruptly and demanded to speak to Eliana. He marched through the estate and out onto the grand stone steps leading down to the gates. There he caught his first clear glimpse of her in years, Eliana, the woman he had once adored beyond measure. Her face was etched with anguish, body frail and belly visibly swollen with pregnancy. Gone was the vibrant, fearless spirit that had captivated him at that lively gathering at the University of Pennsylvania all those years ago. What had happened to them? He remembered the early days, both of them wide-eyed dreamers riding Philadelphia's public buses together, exchanging romantic whispers under campus lampposts. Their wedding was a spur-of-the-moment ceremony at City Hall, a decision fueled by passion and the naive belief that love could conquer any obstacle. Then life had changed drastically when James inherited the Harrington family empire. Pressures multiplied, misunderstandings took root, and arguments erupted about finances, differences in lifestyle, and more insidiously about trust. At one point, Eliana vanished without a single farewell note, leaving James angry and bewildered. Staring at her now, trembling in the cold, was like looking at a phantom from another life. A swirl of emotions assaulted him: anger, regret, guilt. But something else overshadowed them all: fear. Fear that the woman he had sworn to forget might carry a child that was biologically his. Fear that the past he'd locked away was about to rewrite the present in ways he could not control. When James reached Eliana, he stood a few feet away, arms folded, jaw tight. There was a hint of concern in his eyes that he tried to mask with a stern gaze. "How dare you show up here after all these years?" he hissed quietly, mindful of the security guards and staff who pretended not to watch. "Where have you been? Why are you like this?" Eliana found it difficult to speak. Her words came out haltingly, each breath labored. "I had no one else. You turned away from me. I left because I thought—" She struggled to find the right explanation. the weight of years pressed down upon her. James shook his head, a storm of resentment crossing his face. "You left me," he spat, vanished without a word. "I tried to find you at first, but you made it clear you didn't want to be found." Eliana's voice cracked, and I regretted it every day since. Her eyes fell on her growing belly. "I'm carrying our child, James. I'm out of options and He cut her off with an icy glare. He wanted to rail at her for the heartbreak, for the sleepless nights he'd endured. Yet a part of him was too proud to show that pain. Instead, James forced himself to remain stoic. His pride demanded that he not crumble. But inside that pride was costing him dearly. Costing them both, perhaps even an unborn child caught in the crossfire. Marcus and Carter quietly observed the exchange. Their instincts as security professionals told them that this was far more than a mere family spat. There was raw, unbridled emotion here, evidence of deep love twisted by betrayal and misunderstanding. Marcus, recalling the compassion he once had as a cop, felt an uneasy stir in his conscience. Eliana bowed her head in shame, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "If you don't want me here, I'll go," she whispered. "I can't force you to care, but at least I had to try. Our baby." Her voice broke. She clung to the gate for support, her legs close to giving out. James felt an urge to rush forward and catch her before she fell, but he stayed rooted. Instead, he coldly responded, "Let's be clear. You walked out of my life and have no right to demand anything. But if this child is truly mine, I won't turn my back on it. I'll have my lawyers draw up arrangements. You'll be provided for." A flicker of pain crossed Eliana's face. She opened her mouth to speak, but James raised a hand. "No more talk here. Come inside. Let's settle this in private." Although his words seemed like an invitation, they were more of an ultimatum. The security gate clicked open, and Eliana entered a place that had once been her home, yet felt more foreign than ever. Every step she took was haunted by memories of the love that had once flourished, here now replaced by an icy web of resentment, suspicion, and heartbreak. Eliana followed James through the estate's sweeping foyer, adorned with frescoed ceilings depicting mythic gods in swirling clouds. Chandeliers dripped sparkling crystals, lighting the marble floors that shone like water under the sun's reflection. She remembered the day they first entered this house as newlyweds, young in love, full of excitement about their future. How quickly it had all unraveled. James led her to a cozy sitting room off to the side, its large windows opening onto a view of manicured lawns and a glimmering duck pond. The room was decorated in warm earth tones, meant to be inviting. But the thick tension between them stifled any sense of comfort. James stood by the fireplace, facing Eliana, as if she were a defendant on trial. She couldn't hold back any longer. "James, I'm sorry." She began, her voice cracking under the weight of 1,000 unsaid apologies. "I never wanted to leave, but everything changed. You were consumed by the business, by your father's expectations. There was no room for me. We argued and I was scared. I left in a moment of panic and regret it every day." James's cold gaze remained fixed. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" he retorted. Yet the mere mention of his father's expectations pricked a vulnerable corner of his mind. That was indeed a burdensome inheritance, one that had driven an irreparable wedge between them. And now, with every passing minute, the echoes of a once happy home surrounded them both, reminding them how swiftly life can shift from bliss to sorrow. The tension in the room had grown thick, pressing down on both James and Eliana, like an invisible storm cloud. Harsh words lingered in the air, Accusations, regrets, silence. Eliana perched uneasily on the edge of a velvet armchair, tried to control her breathing. Her skin was pale and sweat glistened at her temples. She shifted uncomfortably, one hand drifting instinctively to her swollen belly. James paced by the fireplace, jaw clenched, still wrestling with a tempest of conflicting emotions. Anger, betrayal, confusion, and a gnawing sense of guilt he couldn't name. His pride screamed to maintain distance, but something deeper pulled him toward her, like a gravity he couldn't resist. Then it happened. Eliana's breath hitched. Her fingers clutched her abdomen as her entire body tensed. A low, pained moan escaped her lips. She doubled over slightly, eyes wide with alarm. "James," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. James turned sharply, alarm flashing in his eyes. "What is it?" Her legs buckled beneath her as a sharp, searing pain tore through her core. I can't, something's wrong," she gasped, sinking toward the floor. James bolted forward, just in time to catch her in his arms. For a moment, everything else faded, the estate, the scandal, the past. All that remained was the terrifying reality that the woman he had once loved, the mother of his unborn child, was in peril. "Help!" He shouted, his voice ricocheting down the marble hallway. "Get a doctor!" Now. Marcus, always nearby, was already sprinting down the corridor. Rosa the maid appeared from a side entrance, eyes wide with panic as she grabbed the estate's emergency phone and dialed the private physician. James gently lowered Eliana onto a nearby chaise, propping her up with silk cushions and pulling a throw blanket over her trembling body. Her eyes fluttered open for a second. "The baby," she murmured, voice barely a breath. "You're going to be okay," James said quickly, kneeling beside her, his hand gripping hers. "I won't let anything happen to you. I promise." The minutes that followed stretched into a small eternity. Staff hovered anxiously. Footsteps echoed down the halls as someone opened the wrought iron gates to let in the arriving ambulance. Eliana's face was ashen, her breathing shallow, but she clung to James's hand with surprising strength. When the paramedics burst in, James barely moved aside. He helped lift Eliana onto the stretcher, never letting go of her hand until the last possible moment. As they wheeled her out, James climbed into the ambulance without hesitation. The mansion's grand facade grew smaller behind him, forgotten. Inside the flashing vehicle, surrounded by sterile equipment and urgent voices, James felt the full weight of what he stood to lose, not just a child, but the only woman who had ever seen him for more than the empire he built. As the sirens wailed into the Boston twilight, James Harrington, billionaire businessman, master of control, finally admitted to himself that nothing mattered more than the fragile life lying next to him. Not legacy, not pride, not even reputation. Just her. The ambulance sliced through the Boston traffic like a silver bullet, its sirens a wailing cry that cut through the early evening hush. Inside, James sat beside Eliana, his normally steady hands clenched into trembling fists on his lap. His eyes never left her face. She lay still on the stretcher, eyelids fluttering, her skin far too pale for his comfort. An oxygen mask covered her mouth and nose, and the rhythmic beeping of the fetal monitor provided the only confirmation that the baby was still holding on. They arrived at Boston Private Hospital, a pristine facility known for its discretion and service to the elite. A team of nurses and physicians waited in the emergency bay, alerted by the estate's private physician. James followed, as Eliana was whisked down pristine corridors with polished floors that reflected the flurry of movement overhead. Though used to being the one in control, commanding rooms and making billion-dollar decisions, James now felt utterly powerless. In a private suite reserved for high-profile patients, Dr. Theresa Lang, renowned for handling the most delicate of pregnancies, took charge. She had piercing eyes, softened by years of experience, and a calm voice that commanded both urgency and reassurance. As her team worked quickly to stabilize Eliana, James was asked to wait just outside the door. The hallway was quiet, but not calm. The sterile air smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear. James leaned against the wall, jaw tight, heart pounding in a way no financial risk had ever provoked. He stared at the door, praying for it to open. Every passing minute stretched unbearably long. Finally, it did. Dr. Lang stepped out, pulling off her gloves, her expression composed but serious. "Mr. Harrington," she said gently. "She's stable. The baby's heartbeat is strong, but this was a close call." James exhaled audibly, barely realizing he'd been holding his breath. "She's severely dehydrated and extremely malnourished. The emotional stress she's been under has placed both her and the baby at risk. If she hadn't come in tonight..." The doctor didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. James nodded, shame prickling beneath his skin. "What do you recommend?" he asked, his voice low and raw. "She needs complete rest, a structured nutrition plan, emotional support, and no more sudden confrontations or dramatic upheavals. She's strong, but she's on the edge." "I'll do whatever it takes," he said quietly. "She won't go through this alone again." Dr. Lang softened. "Good, because at this point, what she needs more than a lawyer or a caretaker is someone who genuinely cares. Someone familiar. Family." James stood in the doorway moments later, watching Eliana sleep. Her features looked softer in the hospital lamplight, less haunted, as if some part of her had finally exhaled. Machines beeped beside her. IV fluids dripped steadily into her veins. A fetal monitor continued to pulse like a distant heartbeat of hope. He pulled a chair closer and sat quietly, reaching for her hand. Her fingers were cold, but alive. For the next several hours, James sat in silence, watching over her, whispering apologies she couldn't yet hear. The man who once ruled boardrooms now found himself humbled at the bedside of the only woman who had ever truly seen him, and still might again if fate was kind. And as midnight passed over the quiet hospital halls, James made a quiet vow to whatever higher power might be listening. He would protect them this time, no matter what it cost. Later that evening, when the bustle of the hospital quieted to a low hum, James tiptoed into Eliana's room. The only illumination came from a dim bedside lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. She looked frail but awake, staring blankly at the ceiling. Her eyes flicked to him as he approached, and he saw tears she hadn't bothered to wipe away. Gently, he cleared his throat. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it before. Eliana pressed her lips together. "Better. The baby's stable too," she managed, her voice hoarse. For a moment, the gulf between them felt impossible to bridge. Finally, James found the words that had been lodged in his chest for years. "I'm sorry," he murmured, surprising even himself. "I never meant for things to turn out like this." She inhaled sharply, tears pooling anew. "I blamed you for so much," she admitted. "But it wasn't just you. I ran away when things got hard. I felt like I was losing you to your family's empire. Instead of fighting for us, I left." They sat in hushed communion for a heartbeat of eternity, each replaying old arguments, regrets, and longing. In that quiet hospital room, they shared confessions they should have spoken years ago. Though no single conversation could mend the damage or heal the wounds inflicted by pride, it was a beginning, a fragile step toward understanding in a place where anger had once reigned supreme. The following day, James found himself juggling a world he was accustomed to board meetings and legal briefings, and a new reality that had crashed into his life, supporting a pregnant wife he hadn't seen in years. Harrington Capital's legal team, led by attorney Megan Phillips, swiftly descended upon the hospital to draft documents. They assumed James wanted a discreet arrangement to provide financial support for Eliana and the unborn child, likely with clauses protecting the Harrington fortune. Sitting across from Megan in a small hospital conference room, James rubbed his temples. "I just want to ensure she's taken care of," he said wearily. "None of this can become tabloid fodder." He half expected Eliana to appear as well, resisting the legal constraints or demanding more. To his surprise, she was absent, resting at Dr. Lang's insistence. That left James alone with the lawyers, forced to confront the complicated feelings swirling inside him. At one point, Megan slid over a draft agreement specifying monthly allowances, medical coverage, and a confidentiality clause. James flipped through the pages, but his attention kept drifting to thoughts of Eliana's pale face, her trembling fingers gripping the hospital sheets. He sighed. This was not how he had ever imagined fatherhood or marriage, reduced to legal jargon and rigid transaction. Something in him resisted finalizing the agreement. For the first time in his life, James Harrington couldn't simply buy his way out of emotional accountability. If he was truly honest with himself, what he wanted most was not to hush Eliana with financial security, but to find a way back to the love they once had. As Eliana rested, Rosa visited her room, offering soup and a sympathetic ear. The maid seemed determined to ease Eliana's discomfort. At the side table, Eliana's handbag lay open, revealing a crinkled envelope. Her gaze flickered toward it, and Rosa, noticing, asked softly if it was something important. Eliana hesitated, then withdrew the letter. "It's a letter I tried to send to James when I first left," she explained. "I wrote it a few weeks after I walked away, but I could never gather the courage to mail it." With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. Inside were pages stained with old tears. The words revealed a raw, heartfelt confession, her insecurities about never living up to the Harrington name, her despair over James's growing distance, and her fear that she wasn't strong enough to cope with a life of board meetings, charity galas, and the unrelenting demands of high society. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks as she read. Now more than ever, she felt the urgency of finally sharing these emotions with James. She asked Rosa to give the letter to him, not sure if she would have the courage to hand it over personally. Rosa took it gently, promising she would see that James received it. In that moment, Eliana wondered if it was already too late, or if the words on that old tear-stained letter could still pave the way to reconciliation. Back in the estate, James arrived late at night, exhausted. His heart was heavy after hours of dealing with corporate obligations and gnawing concern for Eliana. He found the mansion silent, except for the faint hum of security radios. In the foyer, Rosa intercepted him. Without a word, she held out the sealed letter. "From Mrs. Harrington," she said quietly before disappearing up the servants' staircase. James stood there, the weight of the envelope in his hand, feeling like a live coal. He climbed the sweeping staircase to his private study, poured himself a whiskey, and sank into his leather armchair. The letter wasn't long, but every sentence weighed on him. Eliana had written about feeling invisible and overshadowed by the demands of his inheritance. She had confessed how her self-esteem had plummeted, how she felt like an uneducated outsider in fancy circles, and how each argument they had only deepened her belief that James regretted marrying her. He finished reading, tears burning in his eyes. All those illusions of control and power he'd cloaked himself in came crashing down. He realized his obsession with building the Harrington empire might have driven her to an emotional brink. Leaning forward, he let out a ragged breath. Love, if it truly existed, still demanded vulnerability and acknowledgement of mistakes. Meanwhile, his impeccable reputation, carefully maintained for decades, hung in the balance. If the press caught wind of this fiasco, it would be front-page news. Billionaire's runaway wife returns. Pregnant family drama ensues. For the first time in years, James was unsure how to protect both his heart and his public image. The next day, James didn't even glance at his schedule when the sun rose. He cancelled meetings, rescheduled calls, and drove straight to the hospital. Passing by the front desk, he navigated to Eliana's room, ignoring the curious looks from staff and patients alike. He found her propped up by pillows reading a paperback. She seemed fragile still, but less wan than before. He took a seat beside her bed, inhaling deeply. "I read your letter," he began, voice subdued. She looked away, cheeks flushed. "I wrote that a long time ago," she said quietly. But the feelings were very real. James nodded, struggling to keep his own emotion at bay. "I'm sorry it ever got that bad. I never wanted you to feel unloved or out of place. I was so caught up in everything, the family legacy, the empire, the high expectations. I ended up leaving you behind emotionally, and I hate myself for it." They talked for hours, rehashing old arguments, clarifying forgotten details, and slowly uncovering where things had gone wrong. At one point, James gently placed his hand over her belly. "Is it really mine?" he asked quietly, eyes searching hers. Eliana gave a small, sad smile. "James, you're the only man I ever loved." The divide, though still wide now, had a bridge. They were two wounded souls attempting to find solace in a shared desire to ensure their child grew up in a world where parents didn't let pride overshadow love. A week passed, and Eliana's condition stabilized. James insisted she stay at his mansion for the remainder of her pregnancy. He even arranged for a personal nurse to attend her under Dr. Lang's supervision. Still, the mansion's once tranquil atmosphere now buzzed with tension and curiosity. Staff tiptoed around, unsure whether to treat Eliana as the mistress of the house or a guest with an uncertain future. As Eliana began to settle into one of the sunlit guest bedrooms, she noticed new pictures adorning the walls. Photos of James shaking hands with Bill Gates at a charity event. James skiing in St. Moritz with a group of affluent associates, and an old picture of James with his father, Jonathan Harrington, at the opening of a children's hospital wing. What caught Eliana's eye most, however, was a small, unframed snapshot hidden beneath a stack of books. She recognized herself, radiant and laughing, standing beside James in their early days of marriage. Meanwhile, rumors circulated beyond the estate walls. A tabloid journalist from the Boston Daily Whisper caught wind of a mysterious, pregnant woman living in the Harrington mansion. Photographers started staking out vantage points, hoping to catch a lucrative snapshot that could be sold to national outlets for a hefty sum. Reports of drones hovering over the property reached Carter Smith's security team, adding another layer of scrutiny to the already fragile situation. As secrets unraveled within the estate, the outside world sensed a story worth digging into, threatening to expose the Harrington family drama to public spectacle. Late one evening, James was in his study, gazing out at the moonlit lawn, when the phone rang. The screen displayed a name he hadn't seen in years. Philip Harrington, his uncle, a trustee of the Harrington estate. James hesitated before answering, dreading the conversation he knew was coming. James came the curt greeting. "Rumors are circulating about a pregnant woman in your mansion. Is this true?" James swallowed hard. "Yes, Uncle. Her name is Eliana. She's my wife." A sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Your father always worried about your impulsive decisions. This is going to stir up a frenzy. The Harrington name is not something we can afford to tarnish. How do you plan to handle this?" James clenched his fists. He remembered all too well the stifling weight of the Harrington legacy. "She's staying here," he said firmly. "We're working through things, and she's carrying my child. Family is more than a brand, Uncle." His uncle's tone turned warning. "Make sure you're certain of your position. If this woman tries to claim undue inheritance or disrupt our holdings, the board will intervene. Reputation is everything in our world, James. Don't let sentiment cloud your judgment." James ended the call, seething. Memories of his father's lectures flooded him. Lectures about loyalty to the Harrington Empire above all else. For a moment he questioned his own resolve, but then he recalled Eliana's anguished face and the life growing inside her. If the Harrington Empire demanded a sacrifice of love or family, James wasn't sure he was willing to pay that price anymore. Despite the mounting pressure from the outside world and the wary eyes of the Harrington family elders, James devoted himself to Eliana's well-being. He took her for gentle strolls through the estate's gardens, showed her the stables where he kept rescued horses, and even arranged small, intimate dinners to reacquaint themselves. Over conversation and laughter, albeit tinged with unresolved tensions, they found glimpses of the old spark that had once united them. Eliana, though appreciative of James's efforts, still wrestled with doubt. Was this renewed attentiveness born out of genuine love, or simply James's sense of obligation? She couldn't help noticing how often he checked his phone, scanning the latest gossip headlines or responding to urgent messages from Harrington Capital. One evening as they walked by a pond, reflecting a half-moon, she finally voiced her fears. "I don't want to be your burden, James. If you're only doing this because you feel obligated." He silenced her by gently pressing a finger to her lips. "Eliana, I can't promise all our problems vanish overnight," he admitted, "but I want us to try. Not just for the baby, but for us." They embraced under the starlight, forging a fragile bond. Yet beneath the surface barriers remained the fear of repeating old mistakes, the unspoken tension with the Harrington board, and the relentless paparazzi who at any moment could break the story wide open. Their love was rekindling, but it stood on uncertain ground, threatened by external forces and haunted by a turbulent past. Just when it seemed James and Eliana might find a measure of peace, a new twist emerged. One morning, a tabloid splash headlined Harrington's "Secret Wife Scandal Rocks Billionaire Dynasty." The story included photos of Eliana entering the estate, her pregnant belly unmistakable. Anonymous family sources had fed journalists rumor-laced tidbits, suggesting that Eliana was after the Harrington fortune, fueling public speculation. Though James tried to protect Eliana from the swirling media storm, it grew impossible to shield her entirely. Reporters and photographers camped outside the gates day and night. Their relentless pursuit dredged up aspects of Eliana's past. Her modest upbringing, Her financial struggles after leaving James, her time working in low-wage jobs to make ends meet. Tabloid columns cast her as either a con artist gold digger or a tragic heroine, depending on who wrote the story. Amid the turmoil, Eliana's stress levels soared, prompting Dr. Lang to voice serious concerns. She admonished James that any further distress could endanger the pregnancy. For James' fury burned at the betrayal from inside his own circle. Who had leaked this story? Was it a disgruntled employee or a family member, eager to protect the Harrington brand at all costs? He vowed to unmask the mole and end the gossip. Yet as each day passed, the media's obsession only intensified. The scandal seemed to grow a life of its own, threatening the fragile truce James and Eliana had found. This time it wasn't only their relationship at stake, but also the very future of their unborn child, caught in the crossfire of greed and sensationalism. Marcus Taylor, who'd been with the Harrington estate for several years, launched his own internal investigation to identify the leak. He interviewed staff, checked security footage, and combed phone logs. Late one night, while reviewing hours of gate camera recordings, he noticed something peculiar. One of the underbutlers, a disgruntled young man named Derek, was seen letting a drone operator into a side entrance weeks before. Cross-referencing phone records confirmed Derek had suspicious contacts with a known paparazzi agency. Seething with betrayal, Marcus confronted Derek in a quiet corner of the estate gardens. At first, Derek denied everything, but under Marcus's steady gaze, he eventually cracked. "They paid me a fortune," he confessed, voice trembling. "I needed the money to cover my sister's medical bills. I never thought it'd get this big." Marcus's anger simmered, but he also pitied Derek's desperation. Still, a breach was a breach, and the damage had been done. He wasted no time reporting the findings to James, who, upon hearing the news, fired Derek on the spot. Legal action was threatened against the paparazzi agency, but even with the culprit identified, the story was out and unstoppable, fueling the tabloids like oxygen to a fire. For Eliana, the revelation was bittersweet. She felt violated, knowing her personal moments had been sold as fodder for the public. And yet she realized that the Harrington fortress was not as impenetrable as it seemed. Money might buy walls, but it couldn't guarantee loyalty. In the end, love and trust would have to be built on something more enduring than mere wealth. As the media frenzy escalated, James faced increasing pressure from the Harrington board, composed of extended family members and key investors who held significant sway in the empire's decisions. Realizing the necessity, James arranged a private meeting at Harrington Capital's headquarters, an imposing skyscraper in downtown Boston, whose top floors boasted panoramic views of the Charles River and the city skyline. On the day of the meeting, Eliana insisted on accompanying James, though she felt a knot of dread coiling in her stomach. They arrived by private elevator, stepping into a sleek conference room with a massive oval table. Seated were a dozen stern-faced individuals, including James's uncle, Philip, his cousin Victoria, known for her cutthroat business acumen, and a few other strategic partners. From the moment Eliana entered, she sensed their scrutiny. The meeting commenced with a tense recap of the scandal's impact on the company's stock prices and brand image. There were worries about how the instability in James's private life could derail delicate negotiations with international partners. When Eliana tried to speak on her own behalf, Victoria offered a forced smile. "We understand your situation," she said icily, "but the Harrington brand cannot afford a circus." James' eyes burning rose to her defense. "Eliana is not a brand risk. She's my wife. We fix this problem by standing united as a family, not by hiding her away." A brief electrifying silence followed. Whether or not the board agreed was another matter entirely. But for once, James refused to bend to their intimidation. He would not sacrifice Eliana nor their child to maintain a facade of perfection. As tensions flared in the boardroom, one person quietly observed Mr. Eamon Thatcher, an older Irish gentleman who served as a long-standing advisor to the Harrington family. He rarely spoke unless he had something of great importance to share. When the argument reached a fever pitch, Eamon cleared his throat. "In my many years, I've seen the Harrington family rise and fall with public opinion," he began. "But I'll tell you this integrity goes a long way. If you push away your own family, no amount of good press can cover that shame." The room fell silent, though some board members visibly bristled. Eamon's position carried weight. He'd been a loyal confidant to James's grandfather, had guided the family through financial storms, and had earned a reputation for wisdom. Turning to Eliana, Eamon spoke more gently. "You left once, and that caused scars on both sides. But your return, especially under these circumstances, deserves compassion and clarity. I urge the board to stand behind James in supporting his wife." A few nods, grudging or otherwise, rippled around the table. Uncle Philip shot Eamon a frustrated glare, but refrained from contradicting him publicly. Victoria pursed her lips, looking unconvinced, but not willing to openly defy Eamon in that moment. With a soft sigh, James squeezed Eliana's hand beneath the table. In the face of so much hostility, any ally, particularly one as influential as Eamon, was a godsend. Yet, as they left the meeting, both James and Eliana felt a trembling uncertainty. They had gained a reprieve, but the struggle to protect their family and their unborn child was far from over. In the days following the contentious board meeting, James and Eliana took slow, cautious steps toward mending not just their relationship, but also their individual wounds. Eliana worked with a therapist, recommended by Dr. Lang, addressing her deeply rooted anxieties about belonging in James's elite world. James, in turn, made a public statement through Harrington Capital's Public Relations Office, confirming his marriage to Eliana and asking for respect and privacy for his family. Surprisingly, the public reaction was mixed, but not wholly negative. Sympathetic voices emerged on social media, with many praising James for taking responsibility and wanting to give his child a stable environment. Others remained cynical, labeling it a PR stunt or suspecting Eliana of orchestrating a grand con. Yet slowly, the story's initial shock factor faded, replaced by other salacious celebrity news. Such was the short attention span of the modern world. Meanwhile, inside the Harrington mansion, a quieter drama was unfolding, the reawakening of genuine affection between James and Eliana. He stood beside her during her ultrasound appointments, marveling at the faint heartbeat pulsing on the screen. Each time, Eliana felt tears welling in her eyes, remembering how close she'd come to enduring this pregnancy alone. Sometimes James would place his ear to her belly late at night, hoping to feel a kick. It was a step toward healing for both of them, no longer strangers bound by regret, but cautious lovers rediscovering each other in the sacred space of impending parenthood. Just when stability seemed within reach, a sudden phone call jolted the tranquility of the Harrington mansion. Eliana answered the landline to hear a frantic voice on the other end, an old friend from her previous life, a woman named Lisa Turner. Lisa had been Eliana's roommate at a small boarding house after she left James, and they had stayed loosely in touch. "Eliana, I'm sorry to call you like this." Lisa's voice shook with urgency. But there's a man looking for you. Claims you owe him money. He's been causing trouble, threatening to go to the tabloids with details about your life after you left your husband. Eliana's heart thundered. A wave of terror coursed through her as old debts and unfortunate entanglements came rushing back. Before reconnecting with James, she had been desperate, short on rent, and had borrowed money from less than reputable sources. Now it seemed one such individual was out for revenge, or at least a payday from any scandal involving the Harrington name. She ended the call, her hands trembling. James, noticing her alarm, demanded an explanation. As she recounted the story, his face hardened. "You should have told me sooner," he said, worry battling anger in his voice. The possibility of blackmail or further scandal hung thick in the air. If the press got hold of any unsavory details about Eliana's post-Harrington years, it could reignite tabloid frenzy and inflict irreparable harm on them both just when they were finding a fragile peace. Unwilling to let the past sabotage their future, James took immediate action. He alerted Carter Smith and Marcus Taylor, who coordinated with local law enforcement to track down this blackmailer and issue a formal warning. James also reached out to his legal team to prepare an injunction against any attempt to publicly disclose Eliana's personal records. For her part, Eliana mustered the courage to confront her old mistakes. She felt an almost painful pang of guilt, realizing that her short-sighted decisions might endanger the stability she and James had fought so hard to rebuild. In a tense confrontation orchestrated in a high-security hotel suite in downtown Boston, James and Eliana, flanked by their legal advisors, faced the man attempting to extort her. He was a slimy figure with a sly grin, clearly drunk on the prospect of a huge payout. But instead of cowering, Eliana clasped James's hand and stood firm. Their united front rattled the extortionist, who quickly backed down when threatened with criminal charges for harassment and blackmail. The crisis dissolved as swiftly as it had appeared. Returning home, Eliana felt the baby kick for the first time in James's presence. Tears glistened in her eyes. "We faced it together," she whispered. James nodded, pressing a hand gently to her belly. "Yes, we did. And we will again, whenever life tries to tear us apart." The message was clear. For all their past transgressions, for all the ghosts that lingered, they were no longer divided. They stood as one, to face both the joys and the storms of an uncertain future together. And so, dear listener, our story ends not with heartbreak, but with a promise of renewal. James and Eliana, once star-crossed lovers, separated by pride and misunderstandings, have united again. Through their trials, public scandals, family pressures, and the lurking shadows of past mistakes, they rediscovered the love that once bound their souls. In the quiet moments when James listens to their baby's heartbeat, or Eliana feels his protective hand guiding her, they find hope shining through each challenge. If this journey moved you, the heartbreak, the redemption, and the proof that even the wealthiest can be humbled by love, then please support our channel. Like this video. If you felt the emotional highs and lows, share it with friends who love a gripping twist of fate. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales that remind us, no matter how vast our differences, love can still light the path home.